Dawson Rider review.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Rider here. Welcome to my review for the Deluxe Beast Racer Converting Zord. This is the deluxe version of Red Ranger's Zord. It has technically four different modes on its own because you have the car mode plus Cheetah Head, Cheetah Mode, and then you have the individual little Megazord mode. And then of course in this review I'll also be covering the main BeastX Megazord formation. But let's go ahead and take a look at this mode. This is its basic default car mode, and I think this one honestly looks pretty solid. I'll be bringing in the Japanese version for comparison as per usual in just a second here, but just to note it on its own, it's got a little bit more of a slender build to it, which is kind of a funny way of phrasing it, but I think it looks pretty cool. It has that same feel as the other Zords do, where it's got this kind of strange plastic feel that almost feels a bit cheaper, but it does feel sturdy in terms of the quality. Like, it doesn't feel like it's brittle plastic that's gonna just deteriorate away. And I think that this looks really nice just on its own. I like the design of it in general. The wheels actually move, which is a bonus. You know, sometimes you get those where a couple of them don't work for whatever reason. So look, rolling action, seconds of fun. But I do like the look of it. I think it looks solid. I think they do a pretty good job of like disguising it. So, I mean, obviously you can see little bits of it, but it's pretty well done in my opinion. Like, just at a glance, you might not even know it's a transforming one. You got the little propeller bit here, which snaps into here, which is a bit of a different mechanism than the Japanese version. Speaking of, here he is next to our pal Ace here in car mode. You can see the differences. This guy's a little bit more of a wide one. This looks like they're Batmobiles, and they're like two different versions of that model. But this one's got a lot more of a shiny paint job, but it's a lot wider, and this one's a little bit sleeker. Honestly, I think I like both equally. Like, they have their differences, but there's nothing about one or the other that makes me really want to say, oh, this one's the clear winner in terms of this mode. I think they're both pretty solid in that. The only thing I will say is that I kind of like the mechanism for this better when you snap this in compared to this one where you kind of have to have the hand sticking out. Although when you snap this in, sometimes it'll start separating this, which is kind of obnoxious, but that's really the only thing of note for that. Then you have this here, which is basically the same thing, but with a cheetah head on it, which is going to happen for the cheetah formation anyway. It's got a really interesting way of going about it. You basically have these two little grooves, and you snap this in here and then push it down, and it kind of snaps in securely, but it's kind of weird, to be honest. Here it is next to that one. As you can see, not much of a difference. I mean, you can see the differences in the cheetah heads, but we're going to see that in cheetah mode anyway. Speaking of, let's go ahead and start transforming this guy. Okay, there we have it in its cheetah mode, which I also think looks pretty solid, to be honest. I actually really like the mechanism here for this, where you slide these underneath here. It gives a little bit more of a sleek feel compared to the Japanese one, where you just have the panels straight up down there. But it feels pretty solid. I think they nailed the design pretty much, and I'm pretty happy with this mode. Like, there's nothing really too much holding it back. It feels solid, doesn't feel really weird or lanky like the Mecha Mode kind of does, which we'll be getting to in a second. This one doesn't roll, though. I mean, they couldn't have put wheels on its feet. I mean, I know that's not what it does, but after all that high-octane rolling I just got from the regular car mode, it's just such a disappointment to go back to not rolling. Just, you know? Alright, now just quickly to compare it to the Japanese version. Here we have them. This guy's a little bit taller. And you do get a little bit more designy elements here, but you can see that like you have the panels just straight up down. And like I said, I do kind of dig that you just hide those away. I think that was kind of a cool aspect that I really appreciated to it. But other than that, the fact that these slide down, the transformations are very, very similar. They basically kept a lot about it. It's a fun and simple transformation. The head sculpts are definitely different in proportion, and you can actually move this guy's mouth open a little bit, and I like the blue eyes on this one. I think that does look a little bit better. But honestly, I think both are fine. Very similar to the cars. I'm pretty happy with both of them. But they kind of both complement each other. Like, I like the head on this guy's better, but I like the way that this works a little bit better. Okay, now let's go ahead and transform into Mecha Mode. Alright, and there we have the Racer Zord in its standard Megazord or Mecha Mode. It's definitely interesting. Even though this is overall, in terms of the design of this guy, my favorite mode, I think it's my least favorite of the toy modes. I think there's just something off about it. I think it looks the cheapest in this mode. There is some kind of nice slender quality to it where you can kind of get some more articulation and stuff, and it just feels a little bit more mobile, and just because of the way that the transformation works, the head as well, and this will pop up a little bit extra, but it's kind of mainly for when you're putting the helmets on the Megazord modes because it gives you a little bit extra space, and I think that looks a little weird like that to me personally. Maybe just because I'm used to aces, but that just looks a little strange, so I like to keep it down in this mode. But yeah, it's just, there's something off about it. I think that there's just an enormous amount of dull looking red plastic, and a lot of the proportions feel really off to me, if I'm being honest. I mean, just starting with the helmet, I think the helmet looks a little bit off to me, honestly. And then something about it, like it looks a little bit better like that, but the glasses look a little bit weird. And they're also off, so you can kind of put them off kilter, which kind of bothers me. It's a small nitpick, but it just bothers me, I guess, you know, and like right here, there's just so much dull red going on that it makes it look cheaper than it is, which is just kind of weird. Like there's just something off about it. It feels lanky. It doesn't feel as nice as the other modes. Like the other modes felt solid. This just doesn't feel right. I think the main problem, I mean, for me, a nitpick in the helmet, like I said, but just comes in here. Like this, I think is a little bit too like long right here, so it makes it seem a little weird. Maybe that's a little bit more accurate, but it seems weird for the toy. And then just the enormous amount of extra red here. Now let's bring in our good buddy Ace. If you're familiar with the channel, you're familiar with this guy, basically the real star of the channel, Ace. So don't worry, he's not getting replaced anytime soon. Ace, I know you're upset, but leave the sword up. But you can see the differences between the two. I mean, honestly, I love you, Ace, but this mold didn't age well in a lot of ways. You can do that to make it seem a little bit more slender, but you're not really supposed to. But either way, he's definitely got some very odd, very toyetic proportions. Like he doesn't fit the way the suit looks as well. But I think that just the general like black details and stuff, and the fact that he's a little bit shorter, just makes it seem like there's much less extra space. Like I don't think either one is perfect in terms of proportions of what they're supposed to be, but I think this looks a little bit overall better for me personally. And I also prefer the head sculpt on this one. Like it's not the 100% best, but I think it looks a little bit better. I think that the visor is a little bit more better proportioned, and the mechanism of which it's on is a lot better. Like I said, with these, they feel kind of loose, so you can actually just move the whole unit, and as opposed to these where they move very tightly together, which is really nice. So yeah, they're both like not the greatest in terms of show accuracy, but I mean, I'm a little biased because Ace is Ace, but I think this just looks a little bit better in terms of not looking as cheap. But of course, we also have a third candidate here, which is this guy. Let me do this. This guy here, which is the kind of just the cheap standalone figure, which obviously isn't the best thing. He's also not the best painted, but I don't think he has as much problems going on in this area for me. This is kind of the perfect blend between the two, where it's a little bit taller, a little more accurate, but it doesn't seem as lanky around here. And honestly, I've mentioned this before, but proportion-wise, this guy is the best at being the actual proportions of the suit, which I think is super cool. Unfortunately, he doesn't transform, and he's also missing a lot of paint, but you know, you can paint that and stuff, but I thought it was worth a look. Like, I honestly think he looks the best of them just in terms of proportions, but I think overall I still prefer Ace. Like, I hate to be so down on this because I was looking forward to it, and I think kids will really like it because it's a lot of fun to transform him, and it retains much of that I liked from this as a toy in terms of transforming between the three modes, but this just feels cheaper than it should for like the centerpiece of all of this, even though the other two modes are solid. Before we move on to the BeastX Megazord, I do have one more quick formation to show, combining with Silver's Zord. Okay, I just wanted to show that off quickly, and actually it looks pretty cool. I always forget about this formation. I forgot about it both when I did my Go Busters revisits and this of something that I had to show off, but I think this actually looks pretty cool. I mean, it looked fine in the other mode, and it's never been one of my absolute favorite formations, if I'm being honest, but I think it looks pretty cool on this one, especially with the added articulation and gun that falls out because I didn't press it into the hand hard enough. That sounded weird the way I said that, but I think it's a pretty cool looking formation. I almost like it a little bit more for this one than I do the Go Busters version. It just looks kind of neat, but yeah, so if you happen to have both of these, that's another bonus mode you get. All right, now let's get on to the main event, which is the actual BeastX Megazord. Alright, and there we have the BeastX Megazord. Definitely an interesting fellow. I definitely think there's some positives. I think overall he's got more of a slender, little bit more accurate in some cases mold to Go Buster O, but it's definitely a weird one as well. You know, it does have some more articulation options, but it feels weird to take advantage of them. That sounded like a weird way of saying it, but it doesn't feel solid enough to make me comfortable with it. Like every time I mess around trying to get a quote-unquote pose out of it with a little bits of articulation, something falls apart or something. But you have the head articulation here. You can move the arms around a little bit here because of the port is. And then because of the way that this bends, you can move the arms a little bit. So you have that going on. And because of the way Red's legs work, you also have some movement. But the thing is that especially with the legs, my leg here on the left, it's the right here, but you know, on the left, you're facing the other way. This mechanism here is super loose for some reason. This one stays in control pretty fine, but every now and then when I try to move this one will always pop off, which makes it hard to like, okay, let me try to move the legs around a little bit, and then it'll instantly, you know, come undone, which is super annoying. So it has this weird vibe to it because of the way that the quality feels of these things, where I was trying to think of the best way to describe it. Like, it feels really weak and lanky, which really bothers me. It's not like it's gonna break. It's got like kind of a solid quality to it, so you don't really have to worry too much about things snapping, at least mostly. But my thing is that it feels kind of like you had to do a school project where you got to make a stick figure out of popsicles, and you're trying to pose it and hold it together to make sure it dries in place, and that's what it feels like to deal with this guy and the Ultra Zord, spoiler alert, so that kind of bothers me a little bit. But I think he looks cool in some instances. Like, I do like some of the proportions, and he can kind of look cool if you get him in a certain way, but there's definitely something strange about this guy. Before we bring in some comparisons, I did just want to make a real quick note of something I liked, which is the mechanism for this. You could do this in the Japanese version, but then you couldn't put these on, so you had to have the arms kind of awkwardly in the back, and I like that they saw that this mechanism could work if you just raised this up, and it's a much cleaner way of storing those compared to Go Buster O. But speaking of, let's go ahead and bring him in. Okay, so here we have the two side by side. This guy's just a little bit taller. Like I said, I think he has some better, more slender proportions. This guy's really got the thunder thighs going on here, and you got this weird bit here where this kind of overlaps, and I do appreciate the fact that they streamlined that. It's an entirely different approach, as you can see. I think this guy feels more solid overall, but they're not immune to pieces that fall off. I talked about in the review for this guy that it's notorious for these popping off pretty easily. These do sometimes, but not as easily for me at least. And this piece here too also can become quite loose. It's not immune to those type of problems, but it definitely feels more solid just moving it around than this. I mean, the little slippers will come off on Go Buster O as well, but it's just not as weirdly lanky as this. I guess it just kind of depends on the way you want it to look and what you want to spend. I think that they both have their positive and negatives in terms of the way that they look. I think that even though this has problems with it, this set does feel just a little bit more overall solid. Just real quick too, before I forget, here is a comparison to the cheap, like, you know, just standalone version, which is not painted at all. That actually has, I think, the best, most realistic proportions, but obviously the least amount of paint going on for it. So, you know, you just have that just sitting there, and it doesn't have any sounds or anything, and it doesn't transform. It just kind of sits there in B's Megazord. But I think that one actually looks the best proportion-wise, which is kind of cool. And it's a great deal shorter, though, but there is something to be said for that. And here's what I was talking about with the mechanism for these. Like, these kind of just sit back here, and I think the instructions have it like this. But I do appreciate that they kind of streamlined that. I think that was an interesting aspect of them actually noticing something from the mechanism and improving on it, which because it's something I noticed when I originally got it from Go Busters. But anyway, that's about it for this review. Overall, I think this guy's kind of a mixed bag. I think kids will like it because it does give you a lot to do with the 3 modes, and if you have the other Zords, then you can combine stuff, or even like with silvers and stuff like that, but it is a bit of a letdown. It definitely feels cheaper. There's bits of it that just feel off to me. I'm not even sure what my recommendation is, honestly. I mean, I think that if you're gonna go for it with these guys, then definitely get Cheetah because it's like the centerpiece for everything. But man, if it's something, there's just something off about it, both individually and as the BeastX goes. So yeah, just sorry if that's confusing, but it's just kind of a weird one to get to a resolution for. Anyway, that's about it for this one. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and of course, don't forget to climb the steps and ring the bell with notifications for all my videos. Until next time, thanks guys, Dawson Rider, signing out.